Hey everyone. Hello, this is People of Substance. I'm Olga, and my guest today is Emily Teixeira. Please say hi, Emily.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Olga. I appreciate it.
So before we get into questions, I just want to mention that you and I met very recently, and we'll get into kind of how we intercepted, which I'm really grateful that we did. But this is one of our first conversations, so I'm excited to get to know you. And
Absolutely.
Emily, you're executive director at an organization called Politisit. I don't know if I'm
That's correct.
pronouncing it properly.
Yep, that's it. It's a
So
combination of political and babysitting. So Politisit.
got it.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that in just a second, but I wanted to just ask you, you've had a nonlinear journey to nonprofit sector, to say the least. You started out in defense sector and did some interesting things along the way. So how did you end up where you are?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a non-linear journey. I started out working as an intelligence analyst at the Department of Defense and spent some time being a yoga instructor full time. And along the way, made my way through back here to running a civic engagement nonprofit. But I think the kind of continuous line through it all has always been sort of trying to figure out where I can insert myself to make the most impact and change. Starting at the Department of Defense, it was more of like a strategic level systems change that I was hoping to be able to be part of and feel grateful that I was in some ways. And then, yoga was much more personal, one-on-one, be able to help somebody in their moment in that day. And along the way, working in politics, partisan politics, and then to this was sort of more of hopefully a little bit of a balance between changing the systems that are at place to make it harder for folks, as well as making it easier on individual folks as we go.
Yeah, I really wish you would have saved your yoga piece for conversation. It's a really unexpected one, so I have a lot of questions on that. We'll follow up. We'll circle back.
We absolutely can.
So tell me a little bit about the organization Politisit. So Politics and Babysit. What does that mean?
Yeah, so our whole mission is to make democracy more accessible to every family. And we know that childcare and the cost of childcare can be a barrier to families being able to participate. And so we cover the cost of the babysitter or the childcare provider while families engage in democracy and in our democratic processes, whether that's going to meet with a local elected official, go to a city council meeting, sit on a community board, or go vote in the national election. We try and just chip away at that one barrier that feels small, but is actually huge for a lot of families who want to participate.
Well, I love what you said that it's not just voting, because I think that's what I anticipated, but it's more ongoing engagement.
Yeah, that's one of our programs. And while it may be financially one of our bigger programs, it's actually, in my mind, one of our smaller programs, because I feel like our bigger impact is in that getting a mom to a school board meeting to talk to the school board that one time for an hour. And the ripple effects that people have in their communities, and hearing from some of our clients on just the changes that they feel they've been empowered to make by being able to be in the room where those decisions are being made. And hearing even from like local governments or boards on the changes that they've seen by having increased participation that's really where our bread and butter is. It's those 365 days of every year that we want folks to be able to stay engaged and continue to make change in community.
So do you have any stories that stand out to you from, I assume it's a lot of women that have been able to get involved in new and different ways?
Yeah, it is. We don't discriminate. We'll cover any parent who wants to be engaged, but you are correct that about 98% of our clients are women. It's usually that systemic combination of childcare falls onto the women's shoulders in most families, and being civically engaged is harder when you can't justify the cost of that babysitter. We have had 4 women who started out just wanting to go. One was a school board meeting she wanted to go to. One was going to volunteer for a parks and recreations board to make sure that their local parks were more accessible to kids like hers. 2 others that wanted to be involved in city council meetings, things like that. And all 4 of them went from saying, I think I want to have my voice heard, to, hey, I can make more change by sitting where those folks are sitting. And so we've had 4 moms go on to leave our programs and run for political offices and all be sitting elected officials right now.
That's amazing. And is it all in your state, North Carolina, or is it nationwide?
No, we're nationwide right now, but our biggest footprints are here in North Carolina and in Oregon, where our organization was founded.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's such a good story that they showed up once and kind of got the bug and realized they could get involved, and why not them?
Yeah, I mean, I think we put so much pressure, especially on moms, to do everything the exact right way and that it should look like this or that. But at the end of the day, like, civic engagement and democratic processes are just about showing up. It's about who's in the room. And I think once people can do it that one time, they realize, like, oh, those are real people sitting up there on that dais. I could be one of those real people. So some of it's also that wonderful part about, like, pulling back that curtain at the Wizard of Oz, right? Like, it's just us. That's who's here to save our democracy and to be in democracy and in our communities. It's us. We're the ones that are supposed to be leading it.
Yeah, that's a very timely Wizard of Oz reference right now. Well, can we talk a little bit about civic engagement? And I know I've seen stats about volunteerism and giving, unfortunately, and voting, and some of these, voting, I have not seen November outcomes yet, but November stats of how many people showed up. But civic engagement, I've heard kind of anecdotal references that it's down. Do you feel like we're in a crisis of civic engagement, or do you think we're on the upswing?
I think we're constantly in a crisis of civic engagement in our country. I think we do have, like, a very short attention span as a nation, but I think we are on anecdotally, we're on a bit of an upswing for our organization. We've had a 300% increase in applications to participate in our programs since November. And some of that is, people get excited about who's been elected into their local offices, or they're upset about who's voted in. And so we try and help people realize, like, yes, that's important, but what's more important is showing up to either support the folks that you wanted there, or to go and fight against policies you don't like that might be put into place. So I think it's one of those constantly important and constantly needed aspects of volunteerism.
Yeah, and I think, before you and I started our conversation, we were talking about kind of the social media and some of the impact and, looking back. So I also recall reading about a term called slacktivism, where, if I send my petition with 2 clicks, I've done my bit, right? So, and is that as meaningful as showing up to a meeting? I would say, well, of course not.
Right. But still meaningful. So, like, I don't want to downplay any sort of civic engagement. I think what I would say is not so meaningful is, like, commenting on the posts and writing your own tirades about what's happening. Like, it's important to be fired up. It's important to care. But do something with that fire. Do something with that care, whether that's talking to your elected officials or even, sending on one of those slacktivist 2-click sends. Having worked in a legislative office, you still have to tally all of those clicks. So it still does make a difference, but no, it's not the same difference as either showing up and talking to them in person, or even sending a personalized email to say, this is why this issue impacts me directly.
So before we started down our conversation, and you and I started talking about nonlinear career path, and I know you've listed Director of Household Management as one of your experiences, and I wondered if you could speak to that. And the reason it really piqued my interest is, it's very illuminating in how we talk about what we do, and when we take breaks or different family obligations. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you came up with this?
Yeah, I love that even piqued your interest at all. It started actually in about 2016, 2017, when I was thinking about getting back into the, like, job world of, like, real jobs where I'd have to work for somebody other than myself or my family. And my time outside of that realm was about equal to my time inside that realm at that point. And so I had folks ask me, and I did a lot of volunteer work that was on my resume at that point too. But I had a couple of recruiters or interviews where folks directly said, like, can you explain this gap in your resume? And while I know that that's actually a unique and interesting way to ask an illegal question for an HR department. I wanted to just be straight up about it and say, yeah, actually, that is the time. That was like the period of time where I prioritized living in foreign countries, translating for other folks who didn't speak the language, being the sort of tour guide, unofficial tour guide for friends and family that came into town, coordinating overseas transatlantic, transcontinental moves. Oh, and creating and sustaining life with my own body twice.
Yeah.
And I think once I finally had that like epiphany of like, no, I did do a lot in that time period. And in fact, a lot of the skills that I would not have had I stayed at a desk at the Department of Defense, I now have. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of tongue in cheek started putting it on my resume as like don't ask me about the career gap. Here's what happened.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of really cool interviews that said, we actually want to talk to you because we saw this on the resume.
Yeah.
And we want to hear more. So I think when you asked about this before, I thought about it and I was like, was that radical? And to think back that it was only like 9-10 years ago, and it almost was kind of radical to just openly say, this is what I did. And I have a lot of skills that I would not otherwise have. And I'm really grateful that like in that 9-year, 10-year time frame, it's not so weird to people to think of like having care outside of or work out in the home as work, and that's now something that we recognize more. I hope. It seems to be, but maybe I've just curated my social media feeds the right way.
I don't know that I've ever seen anybody. I think people are becoming a little more open about it, but I don't know that I've seen it. I'm sure others have had different ways of putting it out there. But I think also seeing it, and that was like a midpoint for you. Mm-hmm. So I think where I've seen it more frequently is people who have not made reentry into paid professional field. So I've seen it more in those places, but not so much kind of as
I've considered taking it off of my CV and all my listings, but then I also realized like, no, there's still a lot that impacts. And while I have transitioned out of the position of director of household management, my husband is retired and stays home and is now our full-time stay-at-home parent. It's still, there's still a lot there that I think if that being on my CV keeps somebody from wanting to work with me or hire me or whichever, or understand better, then I'm not the person for you anyway.
So it's a screener also in a way.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And I do notice more people catch on and say like, oh, hey, okay, I get where that is.
So you're like ex officio now, right? Like that's kind of your status now.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the topics you and I bonded about was, and you've caught some flack for it, but just the whole notion of return on investment and how nonprofits should operate like businesses. So I've had a lot of response to that. But when you talk about ROI for an organization, and you've described it as return on mission as opposed to return on investment. And I sort of love that. But I think some of the reaction has been assuming that we're not willing to be accountable or measurable, right? So can you talk a little bit about your philosophy?
Yeah, I will admit that I spoke about not liking using for-profit business jargon and for-profit jargon when discussing what nonprofits do, because I feel like there's even if it's a subconscious understanding of what that should look like, it grates on me and it grates on the way that we discuss what we do and how we do make impacts. And so full disclosure, somebody in the comments on my post that went crazy was somebody said like, you should look into the term, like the phrase return on mission. And it has been something that has been a bit of a game changer for me because I have no qualms with measuring these returns and measuring the impacts in certain measurable ways. But I think when you talk about a return on investment, it's something that should be more linear, right? Like in our brains, we just think, oh, this is what it is. So for us, we measure things like hours of childcare covered or hours of civic engagement participated in. So X dollars equals X hours. But what you're missing when you do that equation is, and those hours turned into 4 parks that are now accessible to kids in a community that didn't have them before. or those hours turned into a mom feeling empowered, so empowered that she's running for office. And so it's these kinds of things that I think return on investment misses for me. Whereas return on mission is a little bit more encompassing. And so it's a little bit more of, this is where those hours fit into our mission of making democracy more accessible and increasing engagement by parents and caregivers of minors. So for me, that was a little bit more of a comfort thing. And I know it's very semantic. It's not a change on what I'm willing to measure or discuss or figure out how we share that information. It's a semantic change, but I think words really do have power, and we should be more careful when we try and assign words that aren't, or phrases that don't fit appropriately.
Well, and when you think about return on investment, you really kind of think about dollars and cents, and it's hard to ascribe dollar and cent value to societal change or to those four parks, right? Like, and how it impacted the community, et cetera.
Well, I think it goes even bigger into, going back to my role as a bureaucrat, like it goes even bigger into it. Like the cost of a brand new highway, we can tell you how much it costs. Sure. We might be even able to measure how many cars go across it, but what's the value of the highway? Like, and that's the part where we're missing when we say return on investment. It really is it's a much more measurable, much more concrete thing. And I don't think that accurately describes what we in the charity and nonprofit sector, or even the government sector, do with that money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the whole, we should function like a business. And it's kind of laughable because, a lot of times you hear those comments from people who have had the least exposure to the sector. And,
or to business. It's either way. It's rarely people who have a balanced exposure to both.
Right. So, and it's one of those like easy, like one-off sound bites. But when you actually dig into it, it's sort of like, well, yeah, accountability and business mindset, absolutely. But the objectives are so different. And also nonprofit, like Harvard University or a major hospital system that might be a nonprofit, has very little in common with like a little food pantry.
Yeah. And I think also, there's it boggles my mind how we have this concept that nonprofits are less accountable than for-profits. I would argue that we are held to much higher standards of accountability than for-profit businesses. And maybe that's showing my incredible lack of work in the for-profit sector, because I will admit I have not worked in the for-profit sector other than as like a kid in retail. But I think that just in terms of what we have, the standards we have to meet from a reporting standpoint of like our 990s and things like that is a higher standard in general. But I also think that the reporting requirements to go back to like our funders, not just our individual donors, but like grants and things like that. I would love to see some of those folks write a grant report for me at the end of the year to tell me where they went for every cent and account for it. And I think that that's something that people it goes back to what you said of a lack of understanding and exposure.
Yeah. And every grant is going to have different requirements too, which is really fun.
Every grant has different requirements and different application. That's a whole other conversation we could get into about how that works.
That might be more of a happy hour type of conversation. Well, let's turn to a more fun part of the conversation. So towards the end of interviews, a lot of times we'll do a get to know you type of conversation. And in this case, it's a little bit more interesting and exciting because obviously I don't know all your background and all the skeletons. Sometimes when I talk to somebody I've known for a decade and a half, go ahead, surprise me. But we play a little game, two truth and a lie. We try to keep it like PG-13 at most. So you tell me two things that are truthful about yourself, background, interesting tidbits, anything. I already know that you do yoga, so you can't use that one. And then the one that's a fib, and I'll try to spot the flawed one.
I will say, I mentioned this in an email to you, that anytime you've read my LinkedIn, it makes it so much harder for me to come up with these because you have my fun ones that no one would have guessed. So I'll do my less like big picture ones and just smaller ones. So my first one is that I once ran from Asia to Europe. My second one is that I'm allergic to shellfish. And my third one is that I have 29 first cousins.
So I'm gonna say the running one has to be true. Like it just tracks for me because I know you've mentioned you've lived abroad, so it just feels like something that might be plausible. I'm gonna go with you're not allergic to fish because it's kind of like the cups game in Princess Bride. Like it's a lot of cousins.
Good reference. I love that.
Guy's name, but he's on Young Sheldon now. The actor. I'm gonna go with the cousins is true and the fish is a fib.
You are right. I tell people I'm allergic to shellfish because my husband's from New England, and if you don't eat the shellfish, you get a lot of crap about it. So I've started saying like, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm just allergic. Because people don't ask anymore. I don't have to tell them I just don't like it. I know it's great. I don't want it. But the others are true. Yeah, I ran back when I was being really adventurous, I ran an 8K that started in Asia and went across the Bosphorus Bridge into Europe.
Okay.
And I was raised, yeah.
Is that Turkey?
Yes, in Turkey. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I had planned to swim it later, but I ended up getting pregnant and being too pregnant to make that work. And I have 29 first cousins. I was raised in a large Italian Catholic family.
Wow.
My mom has 9 sisters and 1 brother.
Okay. So it's not like they all had multiple kids. It's just.
Oh, no, it's very 2.5 average. Just a lot at that level.
And I think once there's so many cousins, like they're probably like factions and, alliances. Like I imagine it's like, it gets exciting.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I say it that way because my parents moved from Pittsburgh when I was young. So we ended up being kind of our own outside, get to observe some of the crazy, which is interesting.
Well, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you first of all, thank you for connecting and thank you for being on. Really appreciate it and look forward to getting to know you further.
Yes, thank you so much. And I have to say, I am a new subscriber to your channel and I love it. It's so wonderful to hear from other people and kind of get a better sense of this huge industry that we call the nonprofit world.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.